It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Bruno Roque Cignacco, an international business consultant, TED speaker, and researcher. For over 30 years, he has advised and trained hundreds of companies on international trade activities and international marketing. He also trains companies on topics related to compassionate business and human-oriented leadership. He is a university professor and a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy in the United Kingdom. He is also the author of a business and personal development books published in various languages. The second edition of his new book, The Art of Compassionate Business, is available at routledge.com and his website at brunocignacco.com. I will include the links in the show notes. I am very pleased to have him here as a guest on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. Good morning, Bruno. How are you?
Thank you very much, John. Thank you for the invite. I feel very honored to be here. Thank you.
I'm honored to have you here. It's always great to have a cross-section of people from business, from academics, and not-for-profits, for example, to talk about the subject of leadership that I believe is in going through a whirlwind of change. We might get into that later on. So, Bruno, let me ask you the first question, if I can. One of the ideas you support is the idea of a compassionate workplace. How do you describe or define a compassionate workplace?
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question, and we can define a compassionate workplace, a workplace where there is psychological safety. Psychological safety implies that people feel at ease. There is no stress or very little stress. People can give their views on any topic. They can try different ways of doing things, innovative ways of doing things, and also when they make mistakes, they are not punished. There is a lot of research on this topic, and I want to cite a very interesting paper that was conducted by some researchers, and in this paper they analyze compassionate workplace. They call loving workplaces. And what they observe in this type of workplaces where people support one another, when they care for one another, when they appreciate each other, in these workplaces there is higher employee satisfaction, higher customer satisfaction. How can this be? Why? Because employees that treated in a compassionate way, in a supportive way, tend to serve customer much more effectively. They are happy and they make customer happy. But also there are lower stress levels, and there are also lower absenteeism, lower turnover, which imply lower costs associated to these items, and also there is also a better profitability, higher profitability, and also this impact positively on the bottom line. So this means that people not only feel at ease, there is more cooperation, more trust, more camaraderie, but there is also better economic results. So this means that treating people well, supporting them, because at the end, people are the most important resource in business. It's not artificial intelligence, it's not technology, it's not information, but people is the most important resource because it's a resource that can generate other resources such as new products, new services, new system, new business model. So being compassionate in the workplace, supporting people, caring for them, introducing some activities such as mentoring, coaching, training on the job, in some cases shadowing, This type of activity help people develop skills and enhance their innate skills, and they can become much more confident, and they're not only satisfying their economic needs, for example, a good salary, but they're also satisfying emotional needs, being appreciated, being taken care of, and also social needs. They relate to colleagues in a much more cooperative way.
Great answer. And something I believe in completely. I have dedicated my work to creating an environment where people come to do their best work every day. What does that environment have to look like? I want to talk about that in a few seconds. But I agree. And it's to me it's an army banging on the door of a fort and saying the same things that you're saying. We've got to take these old barriers down. And the barrier, one of them being fear, for example. And we're going to talk about that here in a few seconds. I know one of the other issues that's very important to you, as well it is for me, is fear in the workplace, overcoming fear in the workplace. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this. So I've got some things some background introduction, if you will, to the question. Okay.
Okay.
I myself have spoken about fear in the workplace and how the bureaucratic mindset was built on fear. My reference for this is Gareth Morgan, who wrote in his book, Images of Organizations, a brilliant book, and how sociologist Max Weber, the creator of the bureaucratic model, if you will, borrowed the idea. His baseline was from Frederick the Great of Prussia, who I affectionately refer to as Freddie II, as I like to call him. The idea was to introduce organization onto the battlefield. That was Frederick the Great's reasoning. And he took a provincial government to a world power by reintroducing organization on the battlefield. The first ones, I believe, would be the Romans during their time. But anyway, yet today we live with the basic principles we weaved into the modern organization. Now, the thing that Frederick the Great founded organization on in the battlefield was fear. The enlisted people had to fear the sergeants, and the sergeants had to fear the officers. So this baseline, if you will, has been woven into the basic nature of organizations. And I think it's, in many respects, the things that we're still battling today, because organizations still use bureaucracy. If you go down to if you take 10 friends and go down to form a business, one of the first things they give you, at least in the States, is an organization chart. Here's your org chart. And what is that all about? That's about bureaucracy. That's what bureaucracy says. It's the way you express a bureaucratic organization. So here's the question. And let me just add this, that bureaucracy becomes a resistor to change from fear to trust. So the question for you is, with all these things standing in the way, and if you will, that lie just below the surface of an organization, do you think it's still possible to overcome fear with, let's say, a trust-based organization in this post-COVID world we now live?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's possible. It's possible because there is a lot of research on this, and I appreciate your comments. Fear, when people feel fear in the workplace, what type of fear we're talking about? We're talking about fear of being fired, fear of making mistakes, fear of being innovative, fear of sharing resources, fear of being outpaced by colleagues, so competing with other colleagues instead of cooperating. And this type of fear put people in what the psychologists call the freeze, fight, flight mode, that tend to become defensive or reactive. They cannot become proactive. And when people are fearful, their discerning skills are temporarily impaired. This means that they cannot think clearly. Why? Because they feel threatened. They look at the threatening factor. They try to defend themselves or attack whenever possible. And people cannot be creative. There is a lot of studies on fear and creativity. When people are fearful, they cannot utilize fully their creative skill, the natural creative skill that we all have. But also, fear is a contractive state. This means that people tend to withdraw, tend not to cooperate, not to share. They bring about a workplace that is not trust-based. And when the workplace is not trust-based, what happens? It's more costly. Why? Because people tend to put everything in writing. They don't trust each other. They in some cases, they don't want to work as a team or cooperatively. And in any workplace, there is interdependence. If you don't work with your colleagues, some project won't be finalized. Why? Because you need the support from others. If you don't work with other departments, in some cases, the project cannot be arriving at the end of this process. Why? Because you need the support from others. So fearful workplaces, fear-based, I call this fear-based workplaces, are detrimental to any type of what we call quantitative indicator. Productivity goes down, but also efficiency go down, effectiveness go down, competitiveness go down, and innovation goes down. Instead, when people trust each other, when, for example, they care for one another, they support each other, they share resources, they tend to, what happens is the opposite. Productivity goes up, efficiency goes up, effectiveness goes up. Why this fear is exists in the workplace? Because many reasons, but one of the reasons is that people don't trust each other, and there is a lot of micromanaging. So micromanaging is people treating adult people like children. This means that they don't trust even to make the minor decision. I observe when I advise company, I get outraged in some cases. I cannot tell my clients about this, but I highlight this as a thing to improve. The boss is treating the subordinate as a child, a naughty child that cannot be trusted, like a naughty child that is playing with toys, instead of delegating the important task, giving some guidelines for this employee to follow, giving some coaching and mentoring when appropriate, and also training them whenever possible when they don't have the skills, or training to enhance the natural skill that they have. This is quite important because when you trust people, this is bringing about a positive cycle of trust. Instead, when there is a lot of distrust and fearful, people tend to be distrusting because they are defensive, they're not proactive. This brings about psychological unsafe workplace. This means that we talked about in the previous question, this means that absenteeism tend to go up, people feel demotivated, they are less committed, and people are less satisfied, less engaged at work, and this brings about more stress. And let's look at any statistic about stress. Millions of dollars spent by the national system of health to repair the damage of stress in the workplace. And also this is costly for companies too, because the employees, when they're too stressed, they cannot go to work. What I want to say is that fearful people tend to be less productive, less connected to others, and this doesn't bring about any type of efficiency or effectiveness in the workplace and in the company. How can we improve this? Because this is the situation that is very simple, with very simple tip that I generally give to my clients, that is, how can you initiate a positive cycle? You have to look for opposite emotional state. For example, compassion, caring for others, all emotional state that are supportive to others. And some might say, but I'm not the CEO, I'm not the manager, I'm not the boss, I'm only at the bottom level of this organization. Doesn't matter where you start. You start with the role that you have. You can always be a leader. Leadership is also an attitude. It's not only a role, but it's an attitude. And you can lead people by being more compassionate. If you see a colleague that is a bit sad or a bit despondent, you can ask if they need any help or they want to talk about non-business topics outside work, or they can have a meeting, or you can offer them some technical advice when they are lost with their task. So this is quite important because compassion generates more compassion. But also, when you are generous to others, I mentioned in my book a lot about generosity. When you are generous, for example, when you give an ear, when you give thank you to people for their contribution, when you give technical advice, but also in some cases the manager can give something more tangible, a bonus, or they can organize an event to recognize this employee. When you are generous, you tend to bring about a positive cycle of generosity, and you set a good role model to follow by other employees.
I think that's right on. I absolutely. I've said I don't know how many times before on my podcasts that trust is transcendent. It cuts across all the other, whatever you think the other values might be. Trust really stands at the apex. And if you have no trust, you have no relationship. And if you have no relationship, you have nothing. Absolutely. The other thing I'll comment on is micromanagement. Okay. For me, meaning is the greatest source of motivation on the planet. And that's not me motivating you, Bruno. It's providing the impetus, the environment where you yourself are motivated. So the motivation comes from you, from within. And I think it's so important to understand that people are searching for meaning from the things that they do. They want to feel a sense of worthfulness. And I matter to things that are going on around me, to work, to their home lives, or whatever. So I absolutely agree with you. And I want to add this comment as well to this notion. You mentioned it, so I can't help myself. And that is this fight or flight. I have, over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks, in doing the processing of the other podcasts I've had, one day I just came up, I just thought about this. It just came at me like a bolt of lightning. And it was that in addition to fight or flight, there's a third choice. And the third choice is I call dig in. Sometimes you can't run. And sometimes you can't fight back. But sometimes you just dig in and endure. You deal with it, you endure. And I think we have to let people know that is a choice that they make. I can't leave my job. I have bills to pay. I have mortgages to pay, school fees to pay, different things like that. I just can't get up and leave my job. At the same time, I'm saying this, there is this struggle and war for skill talent. So in that area of business, in many respects, I'm sure you've seen this, where people are saying, I don't have to stay here. I don't have to stay with this organization. I'll go across the street. I'm a sought after part of the talent, of the skill talent pool. So I may just do something different than I'm doing here. So it's a very interesting dynamic we find ourselves in. And I agree. You just have to keep pushing on it. We have to keep sending the message that trust, creating a compassionate workplace, an environment where people come to do best work, is not only good for the people, it's good for the company too. A great comment. I want to ask you this, although you really touched on it again, so I want to maybe just go down this path a little bit with you. Do you think leadership is only for those who occupy a position of authority, or can anyone be a leader and practice leadership?
Anyone, in my view, in my modest view, anyone can be a leader. So the role is important, but the role doesn't determine the attitude toward leadership. So in my view, leadership can be conceived as a much broader perspective that includes an attitude of being a leader. And what is being a leader? Being a role model too, because it's not only having people following your vision and also your views and inspiring people, but it's also having people following you because you are a good example to follow. You are a good example that represent the best, the optimal of what a human being could be. And a very interesting example is because in any workplace that I, for example, visit, for example, for my professional activities, I see people that are behaving in a very outstanding way. How they do this? For example, I can see, for example, that when they see some colleagues that are in trouble, they take 1 minute, even when they're very busy with tight deadlines, with multiple projects, they take 1 minute to talk to them, to offer their help, to do some activities together, to check the mistake that could appear and try to see how they can solve together. They support one another. And these people have a very innate wisdom. Why? Because according to research, there is a very interesting paper that observed that take 1 minute to have a compassionate conversation with others, with other stakeholders. They give the example of a doctor that was about to operate a patient, and the patient was very stressed. And the doctor, obviously, the medical professional, was very confident that everything will go well. But this was a very serious life or death operation that could end up well or not. The doctor took 1 minute before the operation to talk to the patient and soothe him with very wise words, telling the patient that they will do their best and they will have to rely on their expertise and so on. They compared, so the patient went through the operation, and after the operation, the patient recovered much more quickly as compared with patients that didn't receive this 1 minute conversation. But also, not only they recover more quickly, during the operation, they need less anesthesia. They were less stressed. So this means that being compassionate with others is not only nice talk, trying to look nice. It's trying to help them, and when you help them, they tend to be more effective. They can be more productive. They can be more self-confident. They can be more innovative. So this means, and this brings about a positive cycle of these qualities like creativity, innovation, productivity, and so on. Instead, when people are on their own, they are self-centered, even though they are interdependent with others, this brings about the opposite cycle. This means that people are more prone to feel distrust, they're more prone to withdraw, they try to care for their own interests without being compassionate with others, and this brings about a negative example. So leaders in the wide and broad meaning of this word, are the ones that are sustaining and also underlying all their actions with this positive principle like compassion, generosity, gratitude. I call this human-centered leadership. This means that you're not only there to develop a nice vision, an inspiring vision, but also you are there to relate to others in a much more human way. This means on an emotional and mental level, bringing about strong ties, long-term ties that are mutually beneficial for all parties involved.
Let's turn to this subject. I've had a number of guests, and we talk about authenticity, the authentic leader. Tell me what it means to you for a leader to be authentic, if you will, to be vulnerable in certain, obviously, in certain situations.
This is a very interesting topic, and I added a new appendix in the second edition of the book on human-oriented leadership, and I talk about this. A leader that is authentic has this characteristic. First off, is humble. This means that they can say when they do not know, and they're willing to look for help. They are not a know-it-all leader. They are not a know-it-all leader, and so this means that they can look for help from advisor, but also in some cases they can get some insight from, for example, the janitor that is cleaning the toilet. Anyone can give them some insights. So because these leaders are open-minded and they have a growth mindset, this means that they're willing to learn. They don't believe that they have learned it all, but they're willing to learn. Humbleness is a very important characteristic, but also vulnerability is a very important characteristic. I mentioned in the book an example of leader, for example, that they have family problems, and they told the employees that they have family problems and they couldn't go to work so much, and this leader hoped that the employees understood, and they were opening their hearts. So this means that they're not only connected to their employees with the head, with the brain, but also with their heart. Not only mind, but mind and heart. So these leaders are authentic because at the end, we are human beings. Before having any role in an organization, we are human beings. A human being that we have setback, positive experiences, negative experiences, fears, hopes, expectation. We don't leave this outside work. This comes with us. It's part of our natural equipment. And I see that in many organizations, you cannot talk about your own emotions or personal issues. Why? Because they feel that it's disruptive. And when people repress or suppress this emotion, these emotions are still there and they make them feel not confident or unproductive, or they cannot give their best. Instead, other companies where they have human-oriented leaders, not only the leaders talk to employees in a much more human way, this means about non-business topic, family, hobbies, issues, health issues, but also in some cases they offer counseling services. This company offering counseling services when employees have some mental challenges or also physical challenges, where they will offer also some well-being pack, which implies gym, meditation, and so on. So this means that these leaders consider employees and all stakeholders as multidimensional beings that don't have only economic needs, like a good salary in the case of employees, but they have emotional needs, need to be recognized, appreciated, social needs, need to be connected to others, and for example, mental needs need to be stimulated mentally, for example, with new project, with training, with coaching, and so on.
Good point. Good point. I think it's so important to be real and to be true. I have some very specific opinions about this in terms of vulnerability or authenticity, if you will. When you say if something happens in an organization and it's because you've done something or you feel you're responsible for it, and you stand up and say, I did that. I'm responsible. It stops here. Something really interesting happens below the surface. When you stand up and admit that the issue was yours, it means you're taking ownership. You own that issue, right? And when you own it, you can do something about it. You can make some changes. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen people never own a thing. So, in a sense, they always stand outside the problem. They always stand outside their own problems. And when you don't own any, you can't do anything about it. So you're in this, woe is me, it happened to me, you guys did this to me. No, that's not going to get you anywhere. Because when you look to make change, when you look to live your best self, if I can use that term, and be authentic, you have to own everything. You have to own what you own. Okay. You have to own what may not have gone right. And I think that's so very important. I think it's just genuinely important to me. And I think I know in my own life that whenever I've been in a leader role and I've stood up and said, yeah, I did that. I made a mistake. I was wrong. People have gathered around me and said, that's okay. All right, we'll fix it. Come on, let's go. What are we gonna do next? They're there to support me. They're there to help me. Because all of a sudden, showing that human side, as you say, connected us as human beings. So very good point. I want to ask you this question, if I could.
Yes.
I call it the shifting sands of leadership, okay?
Mm-hmm.
From one focused on this hierarchical human development model to more of a process model of leadership. The idea being that leadership is an influence relationship and that you can influence at any level you're at. You've already spoken to that. Do you see that changing as a result of the COVID pandemic? Do you see things moving?
I see.
Go ahead, take it.
I see changes. The changes that I observe is that many leaders, I won't say all of them, but many leaders are more focused on qualitative aspect of business. Qualitative aspect of business are aspects that cannot be measured. They are paramount, but cannot be measured precisely, such as what I call quantitative aspect of business. Quantitative aspect of business are market share, profit, and productivity. Qualitative aspect of business are compassion, generosity, care, support, gratitude. And what I observed during COVID, two categories of companies. During COVID, there were companies where leaders were compassionate. People were suffering. They have a lot of challenges. And this leader found the ways to make the life of these people easier. In the cases of employee, they allow them to work flexible times. In the cases of employee that have family, well, they allow them to work a much more flexible time. In some cases, when the economic activity was reduced in certain sector, these leaders paying the salaries to these employees. Why? Because they knew that they were the most important resource. Instead, I saw other type of leaders during COVID and post-COVID that were non-compassionate. they focus only on quantitative aspect of business. It cannot be measured precisely, such as profit, market share, and so on. They don't care about. They don't care about building relationship with the stakeholder within the workplace and outside the workplace. Why? Because they're caring only what can be tangible, what is driven by economic results. But we have to understand that these economic results are always the natural outcome of strong relationship with stakeholders within the company and outside the company. Why? Because profit don't come from out of the blue, from the sky. They come from sales and a strong relationship with customers, company and customers, but also within the workplace among employees, strong relationship. So this means that when you foster this strong relationship within the company and outside the company stakeholders, these economic results tend to improve naturally. These leaders that are compassionate know this. Why? Because they try to foster this robust relationship. And they're focusing on processes of influencing people, but also they are open to understand others' views. For example, they know that there are some processes that need to be followed, but also when people face challenges, they are empathetic. They understand that they can be flexible. They're not rigid, because leaders that are rigid tend to act always in the same way, regardless of the circumstances. So this means, and these two categories of leaders that are compassionate, that are caring for relationship and building a strong relationship with stakeholders, and non-compassionate still exist after COVID.
I agree. And I have to tell you, I have to commend you. That is a profound observation that that we're now driving to this qualitative perspective as opposed to a quantitative overview of things. And I think that's true. People will always be concerned with the quantitative side of it. No question about it. It's going to be there. But this drive towards much more of a qualitative perspective on the work employee relationship, I think, is a wonderful, profound observation. So I appreciate that very much. And I'll just add this, that one of the first lessons I learned in life, in business, was that if you take care of your people, will take care of you. But it goes further. It's in this. We spent so much time talking about taking care of the customer, right? Take care of the customer, take care of the customer, to the point where we burned employees out from taking care of the customers because we just drove them crazy trying to get where we needed to go. But now we understand, and people have come, like you and I, have come to this notion that if you take care of the people will take care of you, and they'll take care of the customers too. It just flows downhill. It just flows. It's a natural movement right through them to the customers, and I absolutely agree with you. And so what I'd like to do, Bruno, is ask you the last question, my favorite last question as we're getting to the end, and that is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it at any issue or problem in the world where you live, so to speak, in the world of organizational dynamics, what would that problem be, and why did you choose it?
Well, to solve a problem, the most important problem that need to be solved, in my view, is solving the problem of companies that are not behaving in a compassionate way. So this is a very important problem. Maybe we meet in 20 years' time and this conversation will be outdated. Why? Because all companies will be compassionate. I have my doubts about this. But this is a very important problem. Why? Because when companies are not compassionate, they tend to be focused on this quantitative aspect, and in many cases, they tend to achieve this quantitative aspect, profit, market share, productivity by all means. In some cases, abusing of these stakeholders. For example, exploiting employees, polluting the environment, deceiving customer, developing win-lose agreement with suppliers. So this means, and how you can expect this stakeholder to cooperate with this company when the company is only self-centered, focusing on their own objectives without caring for the objective of this stakeholder. So my dream, I will say, my dream is that this problem could be solved. And we gave the listeners some clues on how to solve this problem. Being generous with others without expecting anything in return, being caring with others, having a compassionate conversation when people have problems at work or outside work, because we can all have problems. And if you support others, I like what you mentioned before, you generate the positive cycle of reciprocity. People are more prone to support you. Instead, when you don't support others and you focus on yourself only, as a leader, as an employee, as a customer service officer, well, how you can expect others to support you? So this bring about a positive cycle of reciprocity. Generosity begets generosity, gratitude generate more gratitude, compassion generate more compassion, and trust generate more trust.
I agree. People are the most important element of any business. And I think there are many people who are realizing this. I don't want to say it's hopeless. Many organizations are really trying to understand that and figure out how they make the shift from this being not so compassionate, if you will, to being more compassionate and to being more focused on the people. I don't know if I'll be around in 20 years, Bruno, but I guarantee you it would be a heck of a conversation. Absolutely. Listen, I want to thank you so very much. Great job today. I appreciate your presence here on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I wish you all the success in the future. I know you're going to go out there and do great things and help people and be compassionate towards them. So thank you again so very much for your time today.
Thank you, John, for the invite. I feel very honored. Thank you.